Welcome to the Even Better podcast, where your host, Sinikka Waugh of Your Clear Next Step, brings you exciting content about making communities better by helping people get even better at work.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Even Better podcast. This is Sinikka Waugh, and we are here on the Even Better podcast as part of our continuing mission to help make workdays better wherever you happen to be so that together we can co-create better communities. And I am so ecstatic to have Ramona Wink back with us again today. Ramona, thank you for being here today.
Sinikka, thanks so much for having me, and I'm thrilled to be with you and all of your listeners.
This is going to be so great. So if you had the opportunity, if you're listening to the Even Better podcast and you heard Ramona speak before, you know why I'm so excited to have her back. She's going to put some resources in our hands that are so valuable. And if you did not hear her, you need to go back and scroll back through wherever you're accessing these podcasts and go, don't miss that episode. Just had a chance to learn more about Ramona and hear more about her story and really help understand what she's trying to do and benefit from what she's doing in putting resources in hands of everyday people so that we have the opportunity to help support our colleagues and our friends and the people around us through moments where they need extra support from a mental health perspective.
Yes, I am so excited to be back, Sinikka. And again, I'm so thankful for you to help me shine the spotlight on mental wellness, especially in the workplace. I believe in your mission, and I'm so thankful to partner with you on this amazing topic. Mental wellness is something that impacts all of us, whether we are the one who is struggling or whether it's a coworker or a family member or a friend who is struggling. It is such an important topic. And again, I'm just thankful, like you are, to get resources into the hands of people who are desperately in search of such things.
Absolutely. And one of the things I want to make sure that we sort of set up with this conversation is we are not asking our listeners to replace mental health professionals. We are offering resources to help be better colleagues, better coworkers, better friends in the moment. Is that fair?
That is very fair. So many times people have a hard time finding a mental health professional. And I think we talked about that one on the last podcast. And so this session that you're offering me to do with you is really maybe someone can't find a therapist. And this is kind of a stopgap that coworker can feel like they're now empowered to do something in the workplace to make that coworker's life a little bit better and to have a better day, as you would say. So yes, we both believe that this is not in place of mental health professionals. There is such a need for that. This is just a really nice tool that everyone can use to feel more equipped in the workplace, especially about mental wellness.
Absolutely. Thank you. And this is an important conversation because I would say even in my generation and certainly the generations that came before us, there has been stigma around mental health. We didn't talk about mental health. I know in the 90s, we didn't talk about feelings. Like you didn't have feelings at work. Feelings were a thing you did at home, but at work, we just went through work. And we certainly as a society and as a workforce, we've certainly adjusted from that. But definitely this is an important conversation because so many of us just haven't talked about it. We haven't talked about mental health and mental wellness in the way that we're starting to now as a society, and that is so critical and so valuable. And maybe, Ramona, you can shed some light on this. It feels like there's this combination of more people are aware of mental wellness and the importance of mental wellness and maybe an awareness of when they're not at their optimum mental health. And coming on the heels of 2020 and 2021, there is an excess of mental unwellness. We're not all well.
We're not all well. And again, I, as a mental health therapist, and again, that's what I do every day in the chair. And you hit the nail right on the head. People are tired. People are navigating the sense of burnout. I have several teachers on my caseload, and they say this year is harder than last year. It's a harder school year for them. Why? Because most of these kids have not been in school for a whole 2 years. One client that I'm thinking of, she teaches second grade. And so the last time that her students were in a classroom was kindergarten. So there's a tremendous difference and the growth that takes place in those developmental years. And when I saw her this past week, it was by Zoom, so I could see her body language and her face, and she was emotionally and physically drained. And she said, Ramona, all my colleagues feel like this. So again, you are spot on. People are tired, people are burnout, and yet this is the situation that we find ourselves in. So in the darkness, like you, I'm a firm believer that there is always a way to see and find the light, and together we are better, stronger together. And when we can support each other and lift each other up, then everyone wins, and it's a win-win. So like you, I just dedicate my time and my life to trying to do my part to make this world a better place.
Oh, thank you, Ramona. And that's going to take us right into it. So let's get there. You are here talking with us today about 5 things that we can do, 5 things you can do when someone at work opens up about their mental health. So these things can happen at home too. The same are going to apply at home or at work or among your friends. But many people are going, well, what do I do? How do I be a supportive colleague? How do I help that friend? And so we're laser focused today on things you can do at work, but also knowing that you might very well need these at home or in your friend circles as well.
Absolutely, Sinikka. So I'd like to kick it off with do number 1, which is do listen. And that seems so basic, right? And yet so many of us live in such hectic lives, meeting after meeting after meeting, or maybe we feel very disconnected from our colleagues and we're only seeing them on Zoom or chatting with them through email. And we're missing the opportunities to listen to what they're really saying. So as basic as it sounds, my first do is do listen. When you're listening to someone and really being intentional to be mindfully present in that conversation, I believe that as the listener, you have the opportunity to really pick up on some words that might pique your curiosity, rather than just going on and affirming that you heard them and then moving on to the next subject. Part of the do listen is asking curious questions as you're in that conversation. Well, what's an example of a curious question? Hey, Becky, I've heard that you've said that you're really stressed at work today. Can you tell me more? What led up to this? Can you help me understand your world that you're dealing with today at work so that I can get a better idea of how I can support you? Right? That's what we want to do in this do listen and practice that active listening. Active listening is, something that I teach my clients all the time. The person who is talking says their spiel, and then the listener, step 1 is to paraphrase what they heard. Sinikka, I hear you saying that you're struggling with this, this, and this today. Am I right? Asking that curious question at the end of that, after the end of that paraphrasing, that allows you to gain more information. And as I teach my clients, anytime you can gain more information, it's a win. That person is either going to affirm to you, yes, that's exactly right, and this, and this. So you're gaining more information. If you're not right in that paraphrase, that person is going to correct you. No, that's not what I meant, Ramona. Actually, I meant this, and this. So it just is such a simple skill, Sinikka, and yet I'm a firm believer that we need that reminder in the workplace. Number 1, to listen, and part of that is asking those curious questions, and then just going back to that very basic active listening approach where you're paraphrasing, asking the curious question, and then moving the conversation forward from there. So as simple as it sounds, my number 1 do on my list is do listen. I guess another thing I would say as the person is talking, I think because we live in such a fast-paced drive-through society, our minds have become wired as we're listening to people to think, oh my goodness, this is what I need to say next. And we're already advancing that train before that other person maybe even, ending their sentence. So another component of this first point of do listen is to allow that other person to finish their thought, finish their sentence before you interrupt with theirs. Another component, Sinikka, I think is, for whatever reason, I think most people are quite uncomfortable with silence. And I think we have to get better at sitting with silence. And that's part of this do listen. I think if people would really just be aware in their day-to-day conversations at work, I think they would be surprised at the lack of silence that's there. So in my do listen point, sometimes that talker might make one point and pause. And if the listener is brave enough to allow that silence, more times than not, the talker will go on and share more.
Oh yeah, that responding to that pause, guilty, right? I'm a fast talker and I'm a fast mover. And so in those conversations, they breathed, must be my turn to jump in, and this reminder to listen. I love your comment about active listening. And when I teach listening as one of the communication techniques in many of the classes that I teach, listening is a total physical response. It's a whole body experience. You're listening with your ears, you're listening with your eyes, you're listening by leaning in, by pointing your heart at their heart. You're listening by, for heaven's sakes, putting your phone down and not being distracted by whatever else is going on, but listening actively. And I love that, adding to listen for the silence and let the silence be there just a beat longer.
So allowing that silence right there, I intentionally did that, right? Maybe you were uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable a little bit too, but I wanted to demonstrate for you and for your listeners. And it was probably, if we timed it, maybe 2 seconds.
Yeah, maybe.
But it was that uncomfortable pause, like, oh my goodness. But when we can get better at that, Sinikka, when we can learn that skill and hone that skill, I believe that it just creates space for more meaningful conversations, more opportunities to listen and lean in at a deeper level. And when we do that, I believe that our workplace culture is going to improve and our personal lives are going to elevate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So we're here with Ramona Wink talking about 5 things you can do when someone at work opens up about their mental health. The first one, very actively do listen. I think one of the second ones that you shared with me, Ramona, in advance of this is do demonstrate understanding, but you're going to have to unpack that for us. What does that mean to demonstrate understanding?
So on my flyer, Sinikka, it's do demonstrate understanding and empathy. There's a difference. You know this, I know this, and probably most of your listeners know this, but just as a refresher course, there's a difference between sympathy and understanding. Sympathy is, oh, you have fallen in a hole. That's too bad. Empathy is, oh my goodness, you have fallen in a hole. Let me climb down in that hole and be with you. And together we can find a way out. So my second do is do demonstrate understanding and empathy. The understanding piece, you certainly don't want to make it all about you, but this is an opportunity where if your own work experience or your personal life experience has somehow found a similar nugget that you can share with that person, I understand what you're saying because this has happened in my life, and therefore I can relate to you. That then just creates that immediate bridge, let's say, that the listener can walk towards the speaker, and they then feel very connected and on that same bridge. So do demonstrate understanding and empathy. Not sympathy, but empathy. And so I think that's another opportunity where coworkers can really improve their communication skills at work, especially when somebody is opening up about mental wellness. If someone says, I'm feeling really anxious today, that listener could say, I hear you. I remember last Tuesday, I was really anxious at work too. Can you tell me more about what you're going through today? And I bet together we can find a pathway forward that you'll feel better. So taking that time to listen, to understand, to share something from your own life, if it's appropriate, and if you've got that opportunity, and then showing that empathy is so much more powerful than just, oh, I'm sorry, you're having a bad day.
Yeah. Well, and Ramona, you just did something that's really interesting that I want to make sure that our listeners heard, is sharing your own story because you can relate, hey, I felt this, and then you redirected it back to them. And you know what? We are in a culture of looking out for number one and me, and I, and we tell these stories. And even as kids in our early conflict resolution, we're taught to make I statements, not you statements, but I statements. Well, then we get so absorbed in these I statements that we forget to listen to you. We forget to make it back about you again. And so I love how you said, I was anxious Tuesday. I know how that feels. Tell me more about you and what you're feeling. That let's not forget that redirect. I can empathize. I can tell you that I can feel something similar, but I love how you brought it back to the other person.
And that's another do, is keeping the focus on the talker and not on you as the listener, keeping that focus on the person who is sharing, opening up, especially about their mental wellness. We want to keep it on them, Because Sinikka, another thing that you and I both know is when people open up, especially in the workplace, about their mental wellness, that is a brave, courageous thing to do. And if they have been brave and courageous to share a tiny bit of their soul with you as their coworker, then the last thing that we want to do is make the spotlight shine on us, because that just snuffs out their candle and they're already struggling mentally. And then they could feel defeated, dejected, not heard, all of those negative emotions that we don't want them to feel when they're already mentally struggling.
Absolutely. Just recently, I was watching a drama, television drama series, and there was a moment when one of the individual was clearly struggling with a mental health topic, and she reached out and she voiced to someone else what she was feeling, and the other person picked up the ball and said, "Oh yeah, I felt like that too," and then never gave it back. Right, just proceeded to make it all about the other person, and you watch as the spectator on this drama, you watch this unfold, and this person become more dejected and more frustrated and just shut down, and then it closed off her willingness to even talk about it again with anybody, let alone with that person. But it was, she had taken a risk by opening up, and then this person just sort of, like you said, snuffed out her candle, just squished it.
That is so true. And I am sure that brought up discomfort for you because you could empathize with that person who was sharing, right? And it made you feel terrible for her. And so this is exactly, what we don't want to do. And so that's why I'm really thankful that we have this handout, that people can really look for opportunities where they can practice these skills. These are skills just like, hitting a baseball or, sinking a basketball shot or whatever it might be. These are skills that we can all learn and develop and progress with time and practice. It's not rocket science. It just takes that intentionality to be mindful that we can do better.
Absolutely. So Ramona, what you're talking about here, alluding to the handout and the resources, I want to pause for a second and make sure that our listeners know that this is available. So you've compiled a handout. It's the do's and don'ts when someone opens up about their mental health. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource it's a 2-pager. And on page 1, it's got this whole list of do's and don'ts. And we've selected 5 for today. We're just going to highlight 5 of them. And we may weave in some others because it's hard not to, right? But we're going to focus on 5 in particular. But individuals can have access to this. The flip side, or the second side of the resource, has mental health crisis resources as well. So tell us, Ramona, a little bit about how you came to develop this and kind of what your vision is for this tool and how people can get one.
That's a great question, Sinikka. Thanks for asking. When I started doing a lot more motivational public speaking in the mental health space, especially in workplaces, so many times employees, managers, leaders would ask me, Ramona, the information that you're sharing with us is great. We now have a much better understanding about mental health and the tremendous need for providers, especially in Iowa. And you've taught us some great tips of things that you use with your own clients. But at the end of the day, sometimes all we need is the do's and don'ts when somebody opens up about their mental health. And I think somebody said it exactly that way. And in that moment, Sinikka, my brain just, fired and thought, I can make that resource for people. This is what they're wanting. When somebody comes into their office and they're talking about they're struggling with a mental health issue, they just want to know how to not fumble the ball. And so when they said that, I thought, Ramona, there's your green light, right? So go and develop that. There's certainly other resources out there, but I do have this 2-page or a 1, double-sided handout. And I take it to every presentation that I do. And I say, please make copies for everybody in the building. Make copies for your friends and family and people that work in other workplaces. This is just a marvelous resource that everyone can have at their desk. They can take it home and put a copy on the refrigerator. And on the back, Sinikka, like you mentioned, there are crisis resources, 1-800 numbers or websites that people can access when someone is in crisis. And that is another point that we're going to talk about is do become educated and do share crisis resources. That is so important. I heard from so many people, Ramona, I just don't know where to send people. And of course they don't, because they're not a mental health professional. And so on the back of this sheet, Sinikka, there are, and I've broken it out by categories, but there are, like I said, phone numbers and websites for different areas. I'll just read those to you quickly. The top is support for farmers. I come from a farm family. My parents went through the 1980s farm crisis. We knew people personally who were committing suicide at that time. It was a very tough time. Farmers are still struggling today. And so that population has a special place in my heart. So there's support for farmers at the top. The next section is suicide prevention. So if someone is saying things like, oh, I don't know if I want to be here, right? Then you want to have a resource that a trained professional is going to be on the other end of that line, and you can give that to them. The next one is alcohol abuse, and then substance abuse, and then domestic violence. And so I think the next do that we wanted to cover was do become educated. We'll kind of cover two, and do share crisis resources. And this handout allows people to do both.
To do both. Absolutely. So to make those resources available, I recall not in the very distant past, there was a change to the availability of mental health resources in Iowa. And I remember the discouragement that my friends who were in the field, my friends who were personally aware of people with mental health struggles at the time, I remember their frustration. The resources are gone. They've dried up. There's nowhere. And that phrase would come up. There's nowhere left that we can go. And so this point that you're making right here is that there are resources. There in our last podcast, we talked about there is a lack. There are not enough. We need more trained professionals. And if you're listening to this right now and your heart is telling you this is a field you need to go into, then please, please, please go into that and get educated and provide that support. And in the meantime, there are some resources. And so that's your third do here is do share crisis resources, because they do exist. There are some that can help.
They do exist, Sinikka. And again, like I said, at the end of that line or in that website, there's going to be a trained professional on the other end of the line. One thing that's not on my handout, because it came up after I printed this, but a blessing that came out of COVID, if we can think of blessings, which there aren't many of them, but covidrecoveryiowa.org also has some great resources. And if people access that website, again, it's covidrecoveryiowa.org. There are hotlines that people can call. There's an English-speaking hotline and there's a Spanish-speaking hotline. And those numbers, Sinikka, are staffed by trained professionals who will get that Iowan support. For your listeners outside of the state of Iowa, I don't know this, but because it is a federally funded program, I have to believe that every state probably has a COVID recovery, let's say Minnesota.org, because it is a federally funded program. So I do want to highlight that as well. But to your bigger point, do share crisis resources. They're out there. The problem has been so many people don't know where to access those. So I just wanted to do my part and put the ones that I know of in an easy sheet that people can access and make that a little more accessible.
Absolutely. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you saw the social media posts around it, you know that we've shared a link so that you can get to this resource. If you are listening right now and you're like, wait, where do I get one? You can reach out to your Clear Next Step. We will help connect you with Ramona. We'll give you the resource and connect you with Ramona. You can reach out to Ramona. Ramona, how do people reach out to you?
Yeah, they can email me at ramona@ramonawink.com.
Okay. Easy peasy. So they can find you. We will make this available. It'll be one of the resources that we have on our website as well, because we're so committed to helping make workdays better. And it points them back to you as trained professional and points them back to crisis resources that, as you say, are staffed by trained professionals. And in the meantime, there's at least something, right? There's a phone number to call. There's support, and there are things that we can do as colleagues and as fellow coworkers to just help make someone else's day a little better.
And that's going to make that coworker, Sinikka, feel better that they have taken that step and are armed with those crisis resources. I've talked to people and when they don't feel equipped and then they have to go home and think, wow, I really didn't know what to do, then their own mental health, mental wellness suffers as well. And so I just am a firm believer when we can give people the resources, they feel empowered, they feel good about doing their part. And I don't even want to say it's a tiny part, that coworker who's working in a bank or a school or a manufacturing plant, whatever it might be, if they can just pass on that hotline number to that coworker who was really in crisis, that passing along of that information might save a life. And so I just can't emphasize that people might think, oh, it's just such a small deal. No, it's not a small deal. It can be a very big deal. It can be a life-saving deal.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as we are continuing, if you have just joined in, hit rewind, go back to the beginning. You need to hear all of this. We're here with Ramona Wink, and we're talking about 5 things that you can do when someone at work opens up about their mental health. The first one was to listen. The second one was to demonstrate understanding and empathy. The third one was to share crisis resources, and we've talked about how to make those available. We're going to move on to a do not. Number 4 was actually a do not. do not be judgmental. What does it look like when we are judgmental? What does it look like to be not judgmental? How do we do that, Ramona?
I think most people in the workplace strive to not be judgmental. And yet sometimes we get freaked out when people share their feelings. And so in our fear of not knowing what to do when someone opens up about their mental health, I think a standard go-to might be, oh, you shouldn't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
For that person who has, again, just been brave and courageous to share their struggle with that listener, again, that just made that person who is sharing feel very judged. And so I always, when I'm teaching about this, Sinikka, after I've gone through all the do's and don'ts, I always tell the audience, I don't ever want any of you to ever say again, you shouldn't feel that way. And I hope you hear my voice in your head to remind you that that's a big don't, right? Don't be judgmental. People have feelings. We all have feelings, and our feelings can be our truth, and we are entitled to those feelings. And another person should never try to rob us of our own feelings. And when we're judgmental, that's what we're really doing. In my opinion, we're trying to rob that person of their feelings. So I always tell people, as the listener, you may see the situation very differently. You may have been in a similar situation and you would have handled it differently. But that does not mean that that person who is opening up about their mental health doesn't see it like they see it and isn't struggling like they're struggling. And so I'm just a huge advocate of people not being judgmental of the person who is opening up, but rather going back to one of the first ones that we talked about, demonstrating that understanding, and if at all possible, demonstrating empathy. There is a lot of judgment in this world today. We see it all the time. We hear it all the time, whether it's on social media or in politics or on the nightly news or whatever, or in our own families. There is enough judgment to go around. We don't need more of that. So in the workplace, if we can remember that to be respectful, that diversity should be celebrated, and that one way to do that is to not be judgmental, and don't ever say you shouldn't feel that way.
Shouldn't feel that way. Okay. So there's a what not to say. Don't say you shouldn't feel that way. The phrase I use and have used for many years with my kids is your feelings are your feelings, right there. And I use this in my coaching conversations. Your feelings are your feelings. I'm not here to judge them. They are your feelings. Let's talk about how we can move through them. So what's another way? Someone has just opened up, and let's say, Ramona, that you can't get to empathy. Let's say that you've never experienced before. Someone has just opened up that maybe it's something like an elevator ride. They're really uncomfortable getting on an elevator. That's an enclosed space. And that person has just said to you, I would rather take the stairs. And you're thinking to yourself, I would rather do anything than climb up 3 flights of stairs or whatever it happens to be. And so you can't relate. What could a person say that doesn't come across judgmental and that opens the door for that conversation?
That is a great question, Sinikka. So yes, so rather than saying something like, oh, that's silly that you can't take the stairs, right? That's just silly. And if you can't empathize and reflect on a time where you yourself have been scared, then I would say, just going back to that listening component, can you tell me more about the situation? What makes you afraid of the elevator? Was there something in your past? Did you have a bad experience? I'd like to understand. Mm-hmm. I don't have anything in my own life where I can pull from that I can relate to. I haven't had a bad experience like that, but I do want to support you and try to understand. So can you tell me, a little more about the situation that causes you to be fearful of the elevator? And what do you need from me to make your work life, your work day a little better?
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
So do not be judgmental. Let's get to the 5th one, which is so critical. And I see in its words how valuable this is. Do take the person seriously.
My best example on this one, Sinikka, is when a coworker, or anyone for that matter, but we're talking about work today, when a coworker might say, I don't want to be here. Mm. When I hear that, my ears perk up, and I know that I want to ask some curious questions. And that's what I'm hopefully empowering your listeners to do as well, to ask, what does that mean? because I don't want to be here can mean, boy, I don't want to be here right now because I've got to pick up my kids from after school and I'm really running late and I don't want to be here.
Yep.
But I don't want to be here can also mean I'm so depressed or I'm so anxious. I'm having a hard time getting out of bed every morning and coming to work. And I might think it's easier to not be alive. So that is just one that I feel very powerfully about. Again, going back to what coworkers can do is little things like this. Do take the person seriously. Do ask those questions to gain more information, and then do share those crisis resources if they are in crisis. But mental health, there is still such a negative stigma. Sinikka, you and I both know that around this topic. And again, I think people combine that with their fear and their lack of knowledge about mental wellness, especially in the workplace. And so that oftentimes leads people to not taking people seriously because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with it. So I'm just going to not take that person seriously. And we're going to have to keep talking about this meeting that's happening later at 5 o'clock today. And I'm just going to shift the focus to that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we need to slow down. We need to be more mindful. We need to be more intentional. We need to listen to people. And when they are saying something like that or anything like that, I'm really struggling today. My anxiety is at a 10. If they're being brave and courageous enough to tell you those things, do take them seriously. For a situation like that, the listener might say, I hear you. I hear you that your anxiety is so ramped up today. Do you have a therapist? And if so, when do you see that person next? But the last do that we wanted to cover is do take people seriously, because again, sometimes it can be the difference between life and death.
Absolutely. As I'm thinking about that, so I don't want to be here. That's a phrase I've heard. I can't. I just can't. I can't anymore. Those are phrases. So I can't, what you can't solve this Excel problem. You can't deal with that really irritating coworker who's tapping their toes in a very, very loud way. You can't get out of bed. What is it that you can't? And then stopping and connecting with that person to understand, let me take you seriously. Let's default with what can't you do so that I can listen empathetically and be present in the moment. Let's maybe brainstorm some other things that people might hear. I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do it anymore. I'm at a 10. Like, I've had enough.
Yep. I'm burned out. This sucks. I'm drained. I'm fatigued. This has got to end. So again, those are all pretty broad statements. And again, like you just summarized so beautifully, that's where you want to determine, is that worker saying, I can't do this, or is it I can't do this? So anytime I think a person is making a broad statement, I think we can wade into those waters and get a lot more information to know what we're looking at, and then taking that person seriously. Another, going back to not judging them, right? If they can't work with that coworker who is tapping their toes, and you might think, well, that doesn't bother me at all, right? Again, don't be judgmental. It is bothering them. They're coming to you, telling you that it bothers them. And then you, as the leader, it's your responsibility to make that coworker feel heard, to thank them for being brave and honest and vulnerable, and then work together with all three parties. I think you, as the leader, that person who's coming to you, and the person who is tapping the toes, to come up with a solution that it's a win-win for everyone. Yeah. And it might just be going to that other person and saying, hey, this person is just really trying to focus on their job, and consistent tapping that you do is kind of hindering their best work. How can we work together to find a good solution? And that person might say something like, oh, I had no idea. It's just kind of a nervous habit. So I will be intentional to stop doing that. Or no, I can't stop that. It's something I've done since age 12, right? And can you move me to a different desk? We don't know what they're going to say. But I think, Sinikka, just by you hearing that person and taking them seriously, no, I can't deal with this anymore, right? I can't perform because of that loud sound. Maybe it's just an issue physically that just triggers them, and they just literally can't deal with it. So you gave a perfect example. Do take them seriously.
Do take them seriously. I think about how many times it weaves into that, taking them seriously and the not being judgmental. I can't tell you how many times at work I personally have heard, as I've been growing up over the years, deal with it, suck it up. Like, it's fine. Don't make such a big deal. Like, those kinds of things that feels like really, I'm like, I mean, that was just tough, right? They're just making us sturdy, but no, that's judgmental language that I know I've heard. Heaven forbid that we continue that. Heaven forbid that we continue that pattern of saying that to someone else. So maybe they genuinely can't deal with it.
Right. Another one that we used to hear a lot is it's time to put on your big pants, right?
Yeah.
And so and I'm older than you, Sinikka. So you were referencing the 90s. I was a young professional in the 80s, graduated from college in 86. And so, yes, we have come a long ways, and yet there is still a lot more work to be done. And going back to how you opened the podcast about feelings, and that we've come a long way since then, that we are more adept with talking about our feelings. And yet these are still areas that we can show more improvement in. And it's time that we do.
And it's time that we do. Thank you. So if you are just now tuning in, again, you've got to go back and rewind. You got to hear all of this and then go back to Ramona's other podcast episode with us as well. Today, we've been talking about 5 things you can do when someone at work opens up about their mental health. So Ramona shared us tips on do listen, do demonstrate understanding and empathy, do share crisis resources, do not be judgmental, and do take the person seriously. And Ramona has pointed to the handout, the resource that she has. We're going to make that available to you as well. There's additional do's and don'ts on there available to help you just be a good colleague, a good coworker, be supportive. And it doesn't require that you have a certification or degree in the mental health field. It requires that you listen and that you be present and that you care and that you redirect the individual towards someone who can help them if they're in crisis.
I think you said that perfectly, Sinikka. It only requires us to have a desire to be a better human being. And when we can be a better human, our work will go better, our personal life will go better, our social lives will go better. And so again, I just want to applaud you and your team for the amazing work that you are doing, helping people live better, healthier lives every day. I know that's what your mission is all about. And I just hope that your listeners today have found some valuable information that they can share regarding mental wellness in the workplace.
I have no doubt that they have. Thank you so much, Ramona. So we always ask at the end of the podcast, what's making you even better these days? So that's my question to you today.
Absolutely. What's making me even better, and I think I touched on this last time, is knowing my priorities and being very intentional and mindful to live out those priorities. For me, that is my faith, that is my family, and that is doing the work that God has called me to do to make the world a better place. And so I'm very filled. My cup is very filled when I am in church and worshiping. Last week, I got to preach at a church who needed someone to fill their pulpit. And so that filled my cup. This weekend, my partner and I will host my little grandson, Hudson, who's 3.5. So he's coming to our house for a day of fun. And then every day, just being inspired to know that we all have gifts and talents. Sinikka, yours are just, beautifully on display, but we all have gifts and talents, and we can show up to work and know that we are equipped and empowered to make the world even brighter.
Oh, thank you. What a wonderful way to close this, Ramona. It has been a joy. Looking forward to having you back again and again and again, as many times as you'll come back. So we will keep this topic top of mind and available. For those of you who are just listening in, thank you so much, not just, but who are just dialing in, go back, rewind the whole thing. If you've listened to the whole thing, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If you are part of this audience here listening to the Even Better podcast, on behalf of all of us here at Your Clear Next Step, we hope the rest of your day is even better.
Thank you for tuning in today. The Even Better podcast will be back with more content soon. But in the meantime, subscribe to our podcast or check out our website at yourclearnextstep.com for more information. See you next episode.